Okay, wonderful. Well, hey everybody, thank you for joining us for a fantastic session on enabling and empowering data-driven sales managers with the one and only Justin Beck from Checkr. We're going to be talking about some really great stuff here today, specifically around, a really underappreciated topic about how to make managers better so they can make their reps better. It's kind of meta. It's like enablement inception, right?
Yep.
Um, and we're gonna we're gonna talk about why it's really important, even though people don't do as good a job on it as they should. But the good news is we got someone awesome here today to talk about it. He's been doing it at Checkr. He did it at 5 stars before, both of which are super fantastic sales organizations. So I'm really excited about it. So first, we're just going to do a little bit of housekeeping here. This is a modern sales event for those who are members of Modern Sales Pros. Obviously, you're familiar with how fantastic it is. For those who are not yet members, Modern Sales is the world's largest peer education community for sales leadership, sales operations, and sales enablement folks. Essentially, all people who care about sales excellence. Thousands and thousands and thousands of companies and tens of thousands of amazing sales operations, leadership, and enablement practitioners answer each other's questions in online forums, have wonderful events like this, and essentially all just get better together. For folks who are not members, you'll be invited to the community after this event. But really excited to be working with Modern Sales on this event, and it's a phenomenal resource. Also, this event happens to be sponsored by Atrium, my software company. Atrium is a data-driven sales management platform that helps managers use data to improve rep and team performance. It's super easy to set up. You just log in with your Salesforce credentials, and within 5 minutes, Atrium will show you how your reps are performing across all kinds of metrics. It's super easy to set up. So if you want to check that out after Go Crazy, you can set up a free account. It takes 5 minutes and get started on your data-driven management journey there. So without further ado, we're going to get into the topic here. We're going to let Justin introduce himself here in a second, but I'm Pete Kazanji. I'm one of the founders of Atrium, and also I also happen to be one of the founder of Modern Sales Pros. So before this, before I was the founder and chief revenue officer at Atrium, I was a founder at a company called Talent Bin, where I was our founder, first sales rep, first sales manager, and then sales leader. We were eventually acquired by Monster Worldwide, where I was responsible for new product sales, and wrote a book on modern sales, startup sales, called Founding Sales as well. So just do a couple things with sales here and there. Justin, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself there?
Thanks, Pete. Good morning. So hello everybody. I'm Justin. I work at Checkr as a senior manager of enablement, and a little bit about me. So from Kansas, grew up in the country, fell into tech sales in Portland, working for 5 stars. So 5 stars loyalty, amazing company, did just door to door selling to restaurant sales. And then we needed to scale an inside sales office in Denver. So moved here and helped scale out inside sales office to about 60 sales reps very quickly in about a year and a half. So that was wild. And I was, 25, 26 years old and just, flying by the seat of my pants. Didn't really know what I was doing. So that's one kind of cool experience I got to have at a younger professional age, and learned a ton, made a ton of mistakes, and then worked remote, meaning helping to enable a big outside sales team of about 100 outside sales reps for 5 stars. And now I've been at Checkr for almost a year. So, and I've got 3 little kids running around my house that are my kids. So you might hear them throughout this thing.
Wonderful. They can come join us and get started on their data-driven management journey early. Yeah, I mean, five stars and Checkr is so interesting because like talk about like different sales motions and like having to apply data driven capacity to each of them because like five stars selling loyalty to local mom and pops, right? Fairly low ASP, right?
Yeah, big time.
Fairly non-technical buyer, and then doing that from an inside sales organization, which would have to be like super volume, and then probably pretty call heavy, and then B doing that with an outside sales organization where all of a sudden now like visibility is gone,
Yeah,
and you've got fairly junior, probably like non-technical reps out in the field, like vis- visiting strip malls, you know.
it's crazy.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, that
I
must
don't
have
think
been
I
just
knew
like an
how.
amazing challenge.
I don't think I knew how crazy it was, because it was all I knew really. But yeah, it was, yeah. So inside sales was super call heavy, like super transactional,
Yep.
uh, fast paced, trying to get reps to get 7 to 8 deals a month,
Wow.
and yeah, making over 100 calls a day. And then outside sales, yeah, it's just a game of knocking on doors, and it's a numbers game. The more doors you knock on, the more deals you're going to fall into. So,
Yeah.
but trying to manage an outside sales force in a data driven way, yeah, definitely produces its own challenges. So,
Yeah, but like, I mean, it's kind of one of those things where like it's like trial by fire, and then you drop into Checkr, which is obviously, a more, for lack of a better word, kind of like a white collar sale, if you will,
yeah,
kind of like selling to HR, and then also like fairly segmented because like you guys have really big enterprise companies like I don't know if you're like Walmart or Safeway or like fill in the blank, and
yep,
you're hiring a bajillion people a year. Like those are going to be big dog enterprise deals that are going to be like long and slow and a bajillion stakeholders and what have you. And so instrumenting that and like managing that is going to be very different than the mid-market sales motion where you're kind of like selling to kind of startups or kind of like mid-stage companies or whatever, all of which is just super different than the five stars situation, right?
yeah, so different. Yeah, I've learned a ton in 10 months. So I think it's really helped me actually too to bring my more transactional sale mindset to the business over here, and pushes in some new ways of increasing velocity of deals and things like that. So, yep.
Oh, totally. I mean, one of the things that I think actually Jason Lemkin was tweeting about this the other day. He was like, one of the things that you can be that is really fantastic, if you can hire for this, is if you can bring reps who have had a harder sale into an easier sale environment, usually do a
Yeah,
much better job,
for sure.
right?
Yeah.
Versus like, hey man, like the fish just jump into the boat, and then you go into the harder. And I feel that that probably applies to
Oh
sales
yeah.
management and like operations and enablement too. When you're like five stars, like the margins are so thin, and like there's so many reps, and it's like the visibility is so low. It's like if you're successful in that environment, like guess what? It's just like shooting fish in a barrel when you
Yeah.
move into like a mid-market SaaS sale or an enterprise sale, as long as you can get the reps on board and as long as you can get the managers on board, which I think is kind of what we're going to talk about here, which is the kind of the role of enablement is not just like showing up and being like, hey, this is like how we're going to do it, but kind of like leading people towards that. So
Yep.
we'll get into that throughout the rest of the prezo here. Um, yeah, so I think I actually went out of order here because I'm bad at this game. But yeah, just use your Q&A panel if you want to ask questions. If we don't get to them, we can follow up with them later. This is being recorded, so the good news is it's going to be on YouTube later, so you can like watch it again when you're on the Peloton, so you can make sure that you get every little bit of wisdom from Justin. So just to kind of like set some context here around like data-driven management and like why it's so important. This is a little bit of like my kind of like religious rant that I like to kind of talk about. And I think in sales, a lot of us are kind of sports fans, right? And so I think that athletics and kind of and high-end athletics, high-end performance sports kind of shows the path that we can go along here, which is that a lot of these organizations realized that there was a huge opportunity for higher performance and thus profit um, in using better data-driven approaches. So probably the best example of this early on was the Oakland A's, was as kind of documented in the book and then the movie Moneyball, where the A's did a really good job of using data to to recruit better, a little bit different than sales management, but essentially they were using data to improve team performance, mainly by identifying players that had really good metrics, but didn't kind of like look the part, if you will. So we're under bid, and so like an example of this would be this is this kind of fun chart here of um, more payroll expense or less payroll expense down here as compared to league average. And then this is more winningness versus less winningness. And so generally speaking, you see this kind of like linear relationship here between like, hey, it turns out you spend more money, you like win more, right? So like the New York Yankees being the best example, like, hey, we're just gonna pay through the nose for everybody, but guess what? We're gonna win. And so the A's were kind of they bucked that trend and were able to win way more, but for way less money. And so that's an example of outperformance as compared to using data as a source of advantage. And so the cool thing is that if you have that muscle in your organization, right, the ability to be data driven, it's not just like a one-off thing, right? So like the most recent example of this in baseball, at least, is yeah, so like everybody's doing the data driven recruiting now. But are you doing data driven defensive shifts during the games? Right? Where what you're doing is you're recognizing the fact that certain players have a propensity to hit the ball to a certain side of the field, and so if you can then move your if you can move your players in response to that, saying, "Oh, here comes that person whose data has historically shown that he pulls the ball to the left side of the field or the right side of the field. Oh, we're going to move, and then as a result, we're going to we're gonna get more groundnuts and what have you." And so the A's are another example of an organization that does this more than everybody else, right? They do 30% of the times they're doing shifts versus righties, and about 75% of the time they're doing shifts against lefties because they have this data-driven mindset in the organization and continue to use data to exploit advantages there. And so then the question is like, okay, well, if the jocks can do it, why can't we do it? Because a lot of us are, former jocks too. So like, let's get our act together here, and it's time for us to depart this kind of historical, like, hey, always be closing, or like, hey, come on, man, let's like, buy a used car, and instead, use the modern sales approach with a data driven muscle. And so the good news is that we have the data to do this, which is great. We have all these systems that are producing information, and then we have systems that can capture that. We can have the CRM where we can pipe that information into it. All of our activity, our email activity, our calendar activity, et cetera, is being captured in these different places. We just need to make use of it. And so the challenge there and the kind of the gate there is kind of twofold. One is, and this is where Justin comes in, historically manager enablement has been an afterthought, right? Most tools are either A, focus on the rep, or B, help managers focus on the forecast instead of how to improve it. Like, where are we going to land versus, okay, why are we there? How can we make that better? And then moreover, enablement resources have a tendency to go to reps first. So like, the sales enablement people are spending their time doing discovery training or pitch training or what have you. And so this isn't really fair because a lot of times managers are recently promoted ICs, and then moreover, most of the time, like, people don't get into sales in order to be like math people, right? So there's a big training gap here, and that's where enablement comes in. And then secondarily, if you think about the tools that we give managers in order to do this, well, largely it's like, here's a wall of charts, have fun with that, see if you can figure out what's going on in there, right? Like, go find a needle in a haystack there. And so like, this is the challenge that we would seek to surmount. And we're going to talk about how organizations like Checkr and 5 Stars and what have you surmount that. This is also what Atrium focuses on. We focus 100% on helping AE managers and SDR managers use data to improve their team's performance, but that's only part of the battle, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to get into the content here. I think I kind of skipped ahead and already had you introduce yourself. So Justin, what we're going to do is we're going to get into some of the meat of the conversation here. I
Yeah.
think the first question that we wanted to get into was, what does it mean to be a data-driven sales manager?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it actually ties in really well with the things that you just said, and thinking about from an enablement and a management perspective. It made me, what you were just saying made me think back to, I played college soccer, and everyone
Oh, nice.
in growing up would always say, and in college would say, I was
Mhm.
super lucky, and they called it the Beck bounce. The ball would just bounce my way. But what I
Dubious.
realized is it wasn't really I was lucky. It was creating. It was like thinking
Creating
predictably,
luck.
right? It was, I
Yeah.
knew that 1 out of 3 times or 1 out of 5 times, if someone is jumping up for a header and I'm like close to them, or I know the angle the ball's coming in, I'm going to be in the right spot. I'm going to get that ball and I'm going to score. So I think I could always put myself on the right spot in a dangerous position to create my own luck. So I think tying that into this, right, is like, that's one thing that I love about enablement. I like about math, I like about sales, is it is predictable if we create the right structures and processes to create that predictability. So I think a lot of the times this falls on your sales leadership, like high up sales leadership and enablement, to create this world that is easy for managers to survive in. And I like Corey's definition in his sales enablement playbook that I learned a lot from, is creating an ecosystem that's easy for people to thrive in. And I think that's my job in enablement. So bringing it back to data-driven sales managers, what does it mean? I think it's really just making decisions in a predictable way by looking at the metrics instead of shooting from the hip, or going with your gut, which can be good, but so often it is not data driven. It's not enough. It's there's too much emotion and fluctuation in especially startup land or the sales world, right? That you need to look at predictable ways to make decisions, and that is why data driven decision making and sales management is crucial.
Yeah, totally. That's funny about the Beck bounce, because like soccer is a great example of a sport that is like one of my reps used to be a professional soccer player in kind of like, I forget the league below MLS, but like soccer has historically resisted um, like metricification, if you will, and and I think it's largely because like the instrumentation wasn't there. Like baseball's slow enough where like you can hand score the games, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas like soccer and then also like basketball have been examples where it's like historically it was harder to instrument because like the game's so fast, people are moving around. But then as soon as you started getting better data capture, like the motion capture cameras, all of a sudden now you can do motion capture and then also kind of analysis on that. So my hypothesis would be is that if we were to go back and like do motion capture on all of Justin's games, probably you're like, if we looked at the average amount of like steps that you were taking in the game, right? Or the amount of running, it was probably dramatically higher than all the other folks. Oh, there goes Justin getting the Beck bounce again. It's like, no, actually, it just turns out that he takes about 25% more steps than everybody else, because what he's doing is he's noticing where the ball's going to be coming, and then he quickly like takes 4 more steps in order to reorient himself, and then he luckily gets that bounce, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think there's like, what in tying back into sales, it's like there's this, it's foresight, right? It's looking ahead and thinking about what's coming and to make a good decision, which is again how data helps us in sales. So
yeah, when I think about what it means to be a data-driven sales manager, because we do this a lot at Atrium, right? Like we're kind of like one of the primary I don't know, high priests, or maybe not priests, because maybe it's not a religion yet. It's more like we're the heretics, kind of like we're the crazy ones before it actually became a church, kind of like evangelizing for this. And so like my evangelistic claim there is like if you want to be a data driven manager, sales manager, there's a couple things you got to do. Like one, you got to get out of the business of being a super rep. Like you are not a super rep. Like you're not there to like swoop in and close the deal. You're not there to run your reps deals. The second thing is you got to get out of the business of being just a pipe inspector, right? Like getting out of the business of being a super rep is the first step. Good pipeline inspection and deal strategy assistance is a really important thing, but it is not the only thing. And I think that's where a lot of managers stop. like, some organization has implemented some methodology, they've done like medpick or whatever, they brought force in, they brought winning by designs in or whatever. And so like the first step, of course, is then holding reps to account and making sure that we're inspecting those deals, but that's not just it, right? And so instead, what you have to do is you have to get into the business of managing by metric, because that's way higher leverage, right? Like you
Big time.
can't, like listening to every single call, like good luck, even at like 1.75x, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't listen, like even if you're just like listening to a bunch of like chipmunks, like, chirping at each other, like that's still like you have to get in the business to manage my metric. And then you also have to get in the business of being a coach based on that, right? Identifying issues based on those metrics, like, oh man, this rep's win rate is off here, and it looks like his opportunity conversion rate really seems problematic coming out of proposal as compared to everybody else. Why is stuff not closing from proposal when everybody else is closing at 2x? Like, what's the deal there?
Mm-hmm.
Like getting into the business and then fixing, so like diagnosing and then fixing that. And then the last thing I would say is like get into the business of being coached by enablement. Like recognize that you as a manager can improve your skills, right? And what that and where those deficits are. And I think that that's, that being receptive to that, if that's something that your organization does, or alternatively, if you can just do it yourself. Like actually Justin was talking about this earlier, there's a bunch of great resources out there, like Cracking the Sales Management Code by Jason Jordan. There's a bunch of The Qualified Sales Leader by John McMahon. There's a bunch of like resources out there that can help you become a better data-driven manager, but you gotta set an intention to do that.
Yeah, I was gonna one thought on that too is I think
Please.
there's different coaching, right? There's like the deal coaching, but that
Yes.
a lot of times is not scalable. It's like you can do it
Yeah.
for a few reps, but it's hard to coach every deal for every
Yeah.
rep. So, but then I think what is scalable is and it's just a different type of coaching, is skill development. So and I think that's
Behavioral.
really, that's really how we've used it a lot at 5 stars and at Checkr. Is it is coaching. Yeah, what are those behaviors? What are the top reps doing? And how do I scale that across the org? And that starts with knowing the data and knowing where each rep stands.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good point, because like I have half hour I have a half hour weekly recurring meeting with every single one of my reps. It's just a deal strategy block where we just like put time on the calendar for 30 minutes, and like we can only really review like 5 deals. Like they'll have like
Yeah.
40 ops in their pipe, right? They have 40 ops in their pipe, but like we can only review 5 deals right there, and it's the ones that they're like stuck on or need help on or whatever. But that's like me spending, and that's fine. Like I should be doing that, and I should be doing it there as opposed to in our one-on-one,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the more scalable approach is, I had a rep who shall remain nameless, that so Atrium has like a 2 close sales motion where Atrium has a 2 close sales motion where, one, we sell on customer data, so we light up we light up customer data by having people connect to their Salesforce instance. And so like really the deal doesn't progress unless we get that data lit up. And so if we don't do that, there's nowhere else that we can really go, right? And so this rep was like, you could see it in his conversion metrics. We call it data light up. He was having a much lower conversion rate to data light up as compared to all the other reps. And so when we kind of looked at some of his calls, and we realized that he was being too passive, he wasn't being assumptive enough, he wasn't recommending. And so we did some training on that. And moreover, we told him that his patron saint was Marshawn Lynch, the running back, who's like famous for just running people over.
Yeah.
And your patron saint is Marshawn Lynch. We want you to channel Marshawn Lynch on your, after you do your discovery calls, and just like run through things, right? Run through things. And lo and behold, his behavior changed. And so that way, and it showed up in his metrics.
Yeah.
Right. So he doubled the number of opportunities that were converting to data light. And so like deal coaching wasn't going to get you there.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah. And then he can do that not just this month and just these deals he's coaching. Hopefully this is not only his time at Atrium, but the rest of his life in sales, right? So I think, that's awesome.
That's a really good point. Yeah. You ideally the skills stick. Not always.
Not always.
Or maybe they have like a decay rate, Like it would
Yeah,
be interesting to
they
kind of see
do.
the decay rate. Like it like goes for like 3 months and then yeah. Actually, this
Oh
is something
man.
that's really challenging with like remote selling or like
Yeah.
kind of and I'm not super bullish on that because I think I call it skill drift because like what ends
Mhm.
up happening is if you have a bunch of reps who are together, like they kind of hear each other. It's almost kind of like a bunch of people who are like it's like a bunch of inner tubes that are like tied together. Like no one can really drift too far away because like they start bumping out over here and they get like pulled back to the mass.
Yep.
Whereas everyone's kind of like working from home and they can't hear the other reps or what have you. Like you get someone who's just like drifting away just because like he's not being super intentional about it. Anyway,
Skill drift. I
cool.
like that.
Yeah, totally. The good news is like you can catch it in the metrics and be like, your conversion rate has deteriorated quite a bit. Like, what's going on? Okay. So I think you had a bunch of stuff that we wanted to talk about here around, how do you think about the metrics and KPIs to focus on? And because you have like two super divergent sales motions, 5 stars versus Checkr. So maybe you can talk about that a little bit there.
Yep. Love it. So for me, this really is thinking about, back even to enablement, it's creating that ecosystem. It's easy for people to thrive in. I think this starts with setting good goals for what does it take for them to get to their number and get paid, right? So I think you always start when you're thinking about what metrics and KPIs to focus on. The way that we think about it, both at 5 stars and at Checkr, really is the sales algebra or the sales math. So you start with your quota or number of deals you need people to be at, and then you work backwards from the metrics for each specific metric in the sales funnel, all the way back to the top of funnel activities that you need to do to fill your pipeline. So and that's really, I think, the key component that you need to be a data-driven manager is defining those metrics, building that out, and then creating a cadence to really follow and coach that. And I can talk about that more in depth in a second, but would it be helpful if I went through some of the metrics for 5 stars in Checkr, or do you have any thoughts on that first?
I think that would be super rad because I think there's a bunch of folks who like obviously at MSP there's like 5,000 companies or whatever, right?
Yeah.
We have all sorts of different sales motions and like you have this superpower where you've worked on like 2 very different sales motions. So I think that would be really cool to talk about. Yeah, both of those.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, 5 stars, really thinking monthly sales cycle, super fast. Normally it's a 1-call close, right? And it's about, we think about monthly reoccurring revenue, not annual. So we're selling about $200 deals. And what it broke down to is we wanted reps to get about 7 deals a month. And to get 7 deals a month, we knew we had about a 28%-ish close rate. So they had to hold 25 meetings. And that meant they had to set 30 meetings because show rate in the small business world is not very high. It's like, say, we'll call it 83%. That's about what it was. It always fluctuated between 75 and 85. And to do that, you need to talk to about 150 business owners, right? We call that DMs. So that would be like your connect rate with a decision maker. And then that came from, and we had a 20% set rate, right? So if you set 20% of 150, you get 30 sets. And then the combination of making phone calls and knocking on doors, right? In outside sales or in inside sales, it was just straight phone calls. So it came back to, making an inside sales 100 dials a day. In outside sales, it was a combination of phone calls and, knocking on doors around 30 activities per day. And then always trying to break those things down for us, especially for transactional and junior roles. For us, it was breaking that down to daily and weekly metrics. So we were watching it very closely, managing way more tight than you would a more experienced role. So that was 5 stars.
Yep.
Cool. Want me to go through Checkr? Any questions or thoughts on that?
No, cool. I think that's, I mean, super velocity, very phone driven. And, right. Like notice that there was like no email being talked about in there because guess what? Like the lady who runs the like smoothie shop, like is not doing email during the day when she's running the shop.
She's not reading
Checkr is different.
Yep. So Checkr, right? We're hitting a little bit over a 200K quota, bookings quota per quarter, right? So it's quarterly based, and we want reps to have 39 initial meetings, right? That's new meetings. That's really like an SQL. We've got about an 80% conversion from there to an SQO where it's qualified. So a sales qualified op. So running just over 30 SQOs, and our average deal size is around 22,000 annually, right? That's our bookings. And we want them to be at 660 pipe in a quarter. That's new pipe. So that's a combination of inbound and outbound. I won't get into the split of that now. And they're going to close between 30 to 35% of that. That's our win rate. So, and that results in about 10 deals at that $22,000 deal average to get them at their number. And then that to hit that, right? And we don't manage as tightly to activity at Checkr, but, and I'm talking more our direct sales here, more mid-market enterprise AEs. And that's 85 calls per week and 175 emails per week. And there's some LinkedIn activity in there as well. But that's really like the sales algebra of what our average performer needs to do to hit their goal. So we can lay that out for someone when they're brand new and say, you're going to ramp into these metrics and be hitting it by, say, month 3 or month 6 to hit your number and to get paid. So that's the sales algebra, the sales math. And then we can stack rank everybody and see how are you falling on that to coach.
Nice. And then I think it's all well and good to like know what that is, but one of the jokes that know what those metrics, A, what the metrics are, and then B, there was a second component which you talked about, which is what the appropriate levels are, right? You can be like, oh, we're gonna pay attention to meetings. Like, okay, like how many is good? I don't know, right? Like that doesn't count. But then even once you have that in place, you got to make sure that it's being consumed so it can be managed to, because one of the jokes I like to say is it's kind of like if a tree falls in the woods, does and no one's around, does it actually make a noise? Like if you got your SDR activity dashboard, but a manager never looks at it, like do the SDRs actually make any calls? And usually the answer is like probably not. They're researching. So how do you ensure like what are the forcing functions in order to make sure that the metrics are actually being consumed and reviewed?
You used the exact word that I was hoping you would use, the forcing functions. So I think for us, that is the most crucial component of it. Is sales managers especially are busy. They're very busy. So I think you have to put cadences in place to review these metrics as an entire leadership team. So for us, we have different times of the month that we review these metrics, and managers should be reviewing them constantly, daily, at least weekly. But for us, we have all revenue leadership meeting once a month where we review every rep's numbers stack ranked. So you see how are they stacking compared to what we know the right metrics are for them to hit goal. And there could be a combination of those metrics, right? Like in Checkr, it's harder to figure out because there are lots of other components, right? Some reps might be good at finding big deals, so they don't need as many SQOs because they're finding their average deal size might be 50K. So they can hit their number by doing that. So, but I think it's until you have that data, you're just guessing. You're shooting from the hip. You have thoughts on what good might look like, and that's frustrating for your VP of sales to say what's going on, and you can talk about ideas and thoughts, but it's way more efficient to say here is the data of what's happening, and here is why it's happening, and then people can argue with you because you're showing them the data, and the data doesn't lie most of the time. There's sometimes you have to dig into the data, but
kind of like following up on that, because it's one thing. So what we just talked about was like creating the environment for diagnosis, right? And like catching things early. It's funny, like I like how you guys have a monthly metrics review that's like essentially the forcing function, and because we're like, oh well, ideally the managers are looking at it on a weekly basis or maybe a bi-weekly basis, but like you can kind of what is it? If wishes were fishes, right? And so,
Yeah.
and so, like having a forcing function, that one of the things that we like to do at Atrium is like, yeah, we have those meetings that are recurring on the calendar, and then we have hyperlinks to like dashboards and various like different views and what have you in
Yep.
order to create a forcing function. But we use distributions as much as possible. So like sending dashboards
Yeah.
via email and via Slack, and we call it like a data infused environment, such that like, a manager can't help but like look at like, hey, here's the daily Rise and Shine dashboard that goes out, or the Rise and Shine dashboard that goes out on Tuesday mornings and Thursday mornings. Like maybe you didn't look at it on Tuesday, but that's okay. You
Yeah.
looked at it on Thursday, and you caught it. You're like, whoa, what's going on with Bobby, right? And so it's like a series of like like forcing functions and kind of like
Yeah.
back checks. But
Love
then
that.
once you catch something, kind of like what you were just talking about, well then how do we actually improve the performance once we've caught something that's amiss?
Yes, great question. Okay, and I love that point you just made. It's like there's so many different ways you can do this, and I think I see one of my jobs in enablement is bringing transparency to what's happening, like bringing clarity to here is the state of either this rep's business or this team's business from a metric standpoint. So, but how do you creating that world to really improve rep performance? And I think there's two
Yeah.
thoughts here. It's really moving metrics on an individual level in at scale. So it's like, how do we move metrics at scale, maybe for a team of 30 AEs or 10
Yep.
AEs or SDRs? So there's two thoughts there. So I think the first step, and I'm going to try to break this down as simply as possible, but it's building the framework that you need
Yep.
to actually have a data-driven sales org. So I'm going to try to do this in 1 minute or less. You can time me. And there's 5 steps. I wrote it down so I don't mess up. There's 5 steps to it. So the first one, ready, set,
go. Okay, go.
So first,
go.
find your metrics. So start from the quota and work backwards. Define your metrics all the way to the top of the funnel. And that's all of the key things that you can track that will predict a rep success and show you the gap in each piece of the funnel. Second, you've got to build out your entire sales process. So there are things you need people to do at each stage of the funnel, right? So bullet out your entire sales process from how do people build pipeline to how do they have a first meeting? How do they have a second meeting? How do they close the deal? And there's a lot of different things in that, but map it all out all the way to close. Third, metric review cadence. So you've got to have a cadence. Enablement should review with managers weekly, sales leadership probably monthly, some type of cadence that's a forcing function, or even sending out those dashboards like you said. So now you're reviewing it, you're seeing where the gaps are, and you can say, hey, here are my levers to move. And then I don't know, it's a chicken and egg situation of coaching and training, but then you implement a coaching cadence of weekly on our one-on-ones, we're going to talk about this metric, or a monthly, you might develop a training plan or a coaching plan. If I want you to listen to these 3 calls to move this metric, because it's your biggest opportunity. So that's the fourth one, implement a coaching cadence. Fifth one, skill training with enablement. So this is more at scale. It is the easiest way to do it is pick your top 2 reps who are doing great at the metrics you want to move. Dig in with them, see what they're doing, use them as your advocate, and build the training with them. You train everyone on it, and then you've got to get managers on board and agreeing with you. This is important, and then to continue coaching it and have a call coaching cadence. So that might be you measure them on 2 scorecards a month, coaching the specific skill. So that's how you can move a number. And I've got a good example of this if you want me to go into it. But
please.
I don't know any thoughts on those 5.
Going.
Okay, I'm going to say it again.
Keep going.
Find the
rolling.
metrics, bullet out your entire sales process, a metrics review cadence in place, implement a coaching cadence, skill training, and enablement. Those are the 5 ways to move the metrics. So
Justin's framework. So what's the example?
Okay, example. So we wanted to move deal velocity. So our RevOps team is awesome at data, and they came to us and said, if deals close faster, you have a way higher close rate. And that is almost always true. So what we ended up doing is we said, okay, cool. How do we move this metric? So we looked at the sales math, we looked at the data, and we saw here are the 2 reps who had the highest velocity, who are high performing vet AEs. So we dug
Yes.
in with them, and I know great ideas for
Mhm.
how to increase deal velocity, right? Like good best
Yeah.
practices. So I
Like
worked with
moves.
these, yeah, the moves. And so
Right.
I worked with these AEs to figure out what they were doing. And then we built a training, just a 5-slide training around it, or it's probably 6 slides. It was like, here's why it's important. Here's the data of why we need to move this metric. Here are the 5 different ways that our top AEs are doing this. And then we rolled it out and we trained every AE on it. So we went from
Yeah.
about a 45-day close in Q1 to less than a 20-day close in Q2, because we were all on the same page about it and managers were coaching it. And a lot of it was just a shift in mindset and getting buy-in. So
Yeah.
that's my
Like
example.
you identified that you had like 2 reps or whatever. It's like, okay, well, like how do you close so fast? What's going on? Oh, well, like, one of the things that I like to do is if somebody, needs to reschedule or whatever, I just reschedule for the next day. I just put time on the calendar immediately. Right.
Yeah.
Versus like the next week or something. Oh,
Yeah. It
okay.
was,
Like super obvious stuff like that.
yeah, it was like things like sometimes I schedule a 1-hour first meeting instead of a 30-minute first meeting. Sometimes
Right.
when I do next steps, I don't leave it up to them before I suggest times first in the next
Yeah.
48 hours
Recommend.
versus waiting, yeah, for them to say, 2 weeks out. So
Yeah, we had a very similar situation. It's just to go back to the data light thing. I think, man, I really love that framework, Justin, because it's like there's organizational level metrics that you're trying to move, and oftentimes that's kind of like where leadership gets stuck. They're like, what's the biggest thing for us to move across the entire organization? The reality is, though, like one other metaphor that I kind of like to use for sales organizations is like crew boats, like the big kind of like
mhm.
we got the Olympics going right now, right? Where the problem is that like every rep, usually every rep's got something different that's wrong with them,
Yep, for
right?
sure.
Or an improvement area, to use the nicer terminology,
Mhm.
right? But oftentimes there's something across the entire organization as well. And so the example that I was using before about like that notion of like get data light, one of the things that we had identified in our own Atrium data, Atrium on Atrium, was that like, look, if we get an organization to light up their data, right, in Atrium, like connect to Salesforce, then our win rate on that opportunity goes to 55% or 60%.
Cool.
Right. And the reason why is because like people like to talk in abstractions, but as soon as you see what's going on with your team, you're like, hey, this rep right here is ramping way behind everybody else. It's like, oh man, I had a hypothesis there, but like, holy mackerel, it's right there. Like it's like the seeing is believing. And so one of the things that we realized was that one of our top performing reps, what was funny is that his win rate from deeper in the sales funnel,
Mhm.
like in the pilot process, or sorry, we call it a test drive, in the test drive process, in the proposal stage, it was actually a little bit lower than everybody else's, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter because he got so many data live, like his conversion rate from first meeting to data live was just so much higher than everybody else's, right? um and so what we did is we started like focusing on that as an organization. It wasn't just for that one rep I was talking about before, who was particularly like his improvement area there was particularly large. We started infusing the organization around that and just kind of like driving we put a spiff on it. We said, hey, you're gonna get $100 if you light up data, $100 Uber Eats gift card.
Nice.
We
Yeah.
started doing alerting on it. Yeah, as soon as an opportunity goes to that, we started like broadcasting it in Slack via troops. We send emails out and then celebrating it, and like everybody sees it, and so on and so forth. And so, over the period of like 30 days or 45 days, not only did our conversion rate change substantially, but the pure counts. So like that's an organization wide one. But the interesting thing then is like, okay, well, how do you do that at a per rep level? And so that's where I think things get a little bit like kind of dicier, and that's where like you need managers who have their act
Yeah.
together. One of my favorite new books on this topic is you gave Corey Bray a shout out earlier. I'm gonna give him another one. Corey and Hillman wrote a book called Five Secrets of the Sales Coach. It's absolutely fantastic because it just talks about like how to do data-driven coaching in a very specific way, where you're isolating one skill as designated as like kind of detected as an issue in the data, and you focus on that. And kind of the idea there for anyone who's ever like golfed, for instance, I'm not a big golfer, but like your coach never has you work on like multiple things in your swing. It's like, hey, let's fix this part in your swing right here, and then do repetitions on that, and then we can move on to the next thing, right? And
Love
so
it.
the way
Yep.
that we do this at Atrium is we actually have what I like to refer to as coaching dashboards. So we use this in our one-on-ones. We have our coaching dashboards, and it's like a an 8-tile dashboard in Atrium that we've thrown together or whatever. And it kind of had like, and everyone's is different because it's a different metric.
Yeah.
Right. So like we have this Gong integration now where like not only can you get like talk ratio and kind of like Gong metrics like talk ratio and rep monologue and like question rate and whatever, but we also have Gong tracker data in there as well. And so like one of my reps is kind of a chatterbox. And so we've been really working with her on like stopping after her first sentence rather than continuing. And so at the top of her coaching dashboard, it's like talk ratio as compared to team average, and then also rep monologue. And you can totally see that it's changing specifically over time. On another, in the rep who actually is really good at blowing through, like lighting up data, his biggest problem is pipe hygiene.
Of course.
It's like,
Not a
yeah,
surprise.
exactly. Because he's got like a ton of ops and they like so his op, yeah, he's got a ton of ops. And so at the top of his coaching dashboard is like his untouched ops right now as compared to everybody else, and then also his untouched ops like trend over time and what have you. And so
Yeah.
I'm pretty good at this stuff, but I think that like that's the thing, like getting down where you can do individual coaching.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the next frontier.
Well, and I think you pointed something very specifically out too that's really good is a lot of the times the data is just your signal for where to go look. So you
Exactly.
go and you listen to the calls and you say, oh, you're
Exactly.
not pausing after that first sentence. This is a really easy thing to implement and start doing that will make a difference in your business. So I think it's like a lot of the times it's the data is just the signal of like what calls to go
Exactly.
listen to or where to go listen to where in the call to listen, things like that. So
Yeah, totally. That's actually so one of our CSMs, I think she actually might be Checkr CSM,
Betsy.
wrote this playbook the other day, um, on um, on essentially how to use opportunity stage conversion rate data
Mhm.
with call recording in order to do exactly that. Where essentially it's like, hey, let's diagnose where, like, if you have a rep who's under attaining, let's figure out where in his or her like funnel there's a choke point,
Yeah.
right? As identified by like, hey, conversion rate out of this stage is substantially lower than everybody else. Like, are you not getting through disco, or you get to value proposition and you don't progress from there, or you get to proposal and you don't get past that, or you get to paper process and like things kind of like fall out of the pipe there, like, whoa,
Yeah.
what WTF, right? Um, and um, and so then based on where that choke point is, that's where you can then be like, okay, we're gonna go listen to calls there and figure out like what's going on. And maybe it's not listen to calls, maybe it's like right along in those
Right.
situations, because at least now where like kind of the critical path is there. But yeah, it's like it's a little bit of like an indicator of like, go dig in right here, and usually like very quickly you'll be able to identify like, oh man, I see exactly what's going on here, I wish I'd seen this sooner. Cool,
Yeah.
let's do
Yeah.
this.
I'm excited.
um
We have for Atrium, we have a dashboard. So I built a dashboard for our sales managers with our CSM's help
yeah
of it's
yep
just the sales math. And that's what our sales managers look at now. It's what they use and it's just like seeing every rep stack ranked on each of the core metrics that we've defined. But I'm excited to do that next step, which is like from each stage to conversion
yep
rates, things like that. So I feel like we're at like, I don't know, maybe we're at 201, but we're going to get to 301
You guys are pretty.
someday.
You
So
guys, yeah, you guys are killers. You're pretty good. Yeah, I'm excited not just for the conversion from stage, which obviously like conversion from stage, and then or conversion, blah blah blah, conversion from stage to next, and then
mhm,
and then win rate from stage. Like those are
yeah,
two metrics that I just like super love. But then the one that I'm really excited about is time in stage, because you can
mhm,
totally see where people kind of like get sideways,
yeah,
right? And they're obviously like they're super correlated, because like if something gets sideways in a given stage, like it's just a matter of time before it like close loss out of that stage and doesn't
yeah,
convert to the next. And so it's almost like a good leading indicator there, where you're like, hey, this rep's deals are elongating in this stage right here, what's going on there.
Yeah.
Cool. So we have just like a little bit of more time here, and then what I wanted to actually, I think we're almost out of time here. So maybe what we can do is we can answer a couple questions really quickly here.
Cool.
Yeah, so the first one here is, oh man, this is gonna be perfect for you because you've done it all. So what date ranges do you find most useful to, for kind of like metrics review for reps? Is it like, month over
Mm.
month or quarterly, or what's the, what ranges do you find most impactful there?
Yep. Great question. I wrestle with this myself. I think it depends on your sales
I know,
cycle
right?
part of it. So like 5 stars, everything was broken down to monthly. So we really dug in monthly. And then Checkr, we have a quarterly goals, right? So we built the sales math to the quarterly goal versus the monthly goal. So, but we look at it. Yeah, I like to review with the managers if I can. I need to set up a better cadence for this, but weekly, and then monthly we review how we're trending towards our quarterly goal. So I think probably I'd say I don't know if it really matters, but I think the important thing is understanding how are you. I'm struggling with the word, but how are you trending towards your goal, and understand that week over week, month over month towards your goal. Pacing. That's the one. Pacing, because because I think that's important, because you got to know if you're off or a rep is off, because they're not gonna hit their number. And you should never, if you're surprised at the end of the month or end of the quarter, like that's on you. Like that's on you for not knowing your data. So
I think that's a really good point. Like, I think the way that I think about this is it's like sales motion appropriate. It's the appropriate interval, right? We should create a new Justin Beck framework for this. It's like so there's the appropriate interval for sampling, right? So like looking at total, use an SDR as an example. Like looking at total emails sent in a month is like idiotic, right? It's like too big, right? And so like, total emails in a week, that's probably like more appropriate. Maybe even like on a daily basis, right? For SDRs. If you're looking at like activity information for an account executive, well, like emails in a day is probably pretty silly, because like their day is going to change day to day, right? Today I had 6 meetings and like I didn't have time for anything, right? And like tomorrow I had whatever. And so, so that, and then moreover, so like that might be like a weekly thing there. And the same is true with like, so I think it's on a metric by metric basis, right? Looking at how many new opportunities come into an account executive's pipe on a weekly basis, that might be like a little aggressive, right? Because it's just going to be too noisy. And we see this a lot when we work with organizations to set goals for Atrium to automatically track. Because sometimes organizations want to get like super minute. They're like, yeah, I want to make sure that the AEs are having 5 opportunities come into their pipe each week, because we have a goal of like 20 a month. It's like, well, that's like probably a little fast, because like one week they're going to have 2, and like, it's going to be like, wow, this person's under their goal. And then the next week they'll have 8, and it kind of comes out in the wash, right? So I think it's like setting the appropriate time frame on a metric based on kind of like the natural velocity, or like what I like to call the physics of the sales motion, is really important. The same is true when you're looking at like quality metrics. So what you need is like an appropriate sampling period. So like a good example of this would be like win rate is a good example. Like if you're looking at like trailing 30 days for win rate, like trailing 30 days win rate for 5 stars all day long, right? But like trailing 30 days for like win rate on the mid-market team at Checkr, well, that'd be silly, right? Because like, it would almost be like impacted by pipe hygiene, right?
Totally.
Like, Bobby closed out a bunch. Yeah, like Bobby closed out a bunch of ops, and like, oh man, his like win rate tanked or whatever. It's like, well, it's because you're sampling on 30 days. Like, come on, man. Like that should be like trailing 90 days, right? So I think like having a good sampling, like knowing what the appropriate sampling period is kind of a good approach there. I like the build up over time, because like what I'll do is, so like our teams are on quarterly quotas. But we also, it's like there are quarterly bookings quotas. So I have that set as a goal in Atrium, but then I also do the same thing with like monthly, right? Just like, almost like as an FYI, like if the quarterly pace is off, like I'm worried there. If the monthly one's like, I'm like, oh, I'm a little less worried. It's more of like an FYI. If the monthly new op inflow is off, I'm like, okay, WTF, because like I know that if their like monthly op inflow is off, like that's going to be a major problem in, one one sales cycle, 1.5 sales cycles. So that's how I think about that.
Yeah, love
Cool.
that.
So what's
I think
the
I
so
was say, I think it's
go ahead.
important to just not to overreact. Also, like I think you kind of talked about
Sure.
this, but just don't overreact when you see a metric that is like way off if you don't fully understand it. Because I think I've made that mistake in the past and been like, what the heck? Like, what's wrong with this? And then I start asking questions like, oh, this AE was on PTO for a week. So I think it's like, yeah, don't overreact also. So right.
Right. It's like don't overreact on the metric in a short time at
Mm-hmm.
the beginning end of the time interval, but like definitely overreact if it's like, okay, cool, we're 50% of the way through the month and this person is like, at half of their new op inflow,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Or they're
Absolutely.
at,
You should be
like,
slamming
red
doors
alarm.
and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, red alert, like what's going on there? Like, hey, we're halfway through like we're halfway through the month and this person persists at being off with their customer facing meeting volume. Yikes, right?
Yep.
Cool. So last question there. Um, so what are there any metrics that you were surprised having a greater impact on rep success than you had expected? So kind of like, I don't want to say like non-traditional, but like, man, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't think about like how impactful this would be. Any kind of things that popped to mind there?
I think deal velocity was kind of an interest. I mean, I guess that's not a good idea.
Sure.
Like that's just kind of sales 101, like time kills deals. But
Oh, I don't know
really,
about
maybe,
that, man. Like
yeah.
I
In my
think
world, transactional
there's like deal
sales.
cycle.
Yeah.
Sure.
Sorry, keep going. What were you
Well,
gonna
I
say?
was gonna say, like, no, I don't think that. I think that like deal cycle is all well and good, but like then getting into the nitty gritty of like the per stage or
Yeah.
when the deal is like the op age, that's pretty
Yeah,
sophisticated.
yeah,
So
yeah.
say more about that.
Well, okay. So I think at 5 stars, right? That's it's hard to impact that. I guess if you're
Mm,
understanding like some reps just one call close everything, other reps don't. Um, so that's one thing. But yeah, but I think yes, to your point, it's like understanding like why are deals getting held up for a certain rep
mm,
more often versus a top rep. There's a lots of coaching in there. So that's one. I think the other one is I'm always just like top of funnel activity. I feel like always gets a bad rap, like go make phone calls. And everyone's
oh
like,
yeah.
doesn't really work. It doesn't work. But then I just feel like every time someone actually does pound
100%.
the phones or something, it moves the number. So I think people saying that cold calling doesn't work anymore, I think is still is not true. So that's
I
one that
think that
they
people
kind of
are
always
just like, yeah, like in kind of like not just the enterprise SaaS land, but also like mid-market SaaS land. I think, yeah, people just don't appreciate like sales success is driven by a high quantity of high quality activity,
mm-hmm.
right? And what happens is people are like, oh, well, like, it's more fun to kind of like goof off on LinkedIn and talk about like,
Yeah.
the quality of this call and the deal strategy or whatever versus like, shoot or shoot, right?
Yep.
And like
Absolutely.
give yourself lots of shots.
And
Who
don't
was the
get
woman I was stuck?
sorry,
Go
keep
ahead.
going. I was gonna say, don't get hung up on the one bad experience you had, because I think that's the thing too. It's like I keep seeing posts about mean people that you cold call. It's like people are gonna be mean. It's like, but it's like that. How often does that actually happen? So I think I like the idea of like my goals are too big to let someone's bad day get in the way of my goals and running through
Yeah.
things to put myself in the best chance for the ball to fall my way.
Yeah.
So
I think, yeah, the metrics are greater impact than expected. I think, yeah, activity metrics for like, quote unquote non-transactional reps. Like, I mean, we work with like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of companies, and it's hilarious to see like, oh man, like what's the recipe of success of this top performer? It's like, well, they have about 30% more meetings than everybody else. Every time,
Shocker.
every
Yeah.
every time. It's just like, cool. They're just like a honey badger, right? And it's just
Yeah.
like, oh, what? No, that's just Justin Beck. He gets the Beck bounce. It's like, no, he's running around. He's like getting himself in position.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that like I've just been like jumping up and down about since we shipped it, like one of the fun things that I love about working on Atrium is that like we get to eat our own dog food, and like I've just been getting crazy with the opportunity conversion rate stuff, right? So like conversion rate out of a stage, win rate from a stage, and then tying that with these new metrics that we have, which is essentially like how many opportunities make it to a stage,
Mhm.
right? So it's essentially that quantity and quality, like how many ops are getting to Disco, right? How many ops are get for this rep? How many ops are getting to Data Live? How many ops are getting to proposal? And then if you see a gap, it's like, whoa, what's going on here? Like this rep gets a lot of ops coming into their pipe, but like nothing's getting to proposal. Oh man, what's going on? Like, oh, it's falling out right there. Okay, great. And so like I've just been super pumped on that because we've started setting goals on that where we're like, look, we have an expectation that you have a a 55% win rate from data live. Like if you light up data, you should be closing some sort of transaction, right? 55% of the time. We have an expectation that we have an 80% win rate from proposal, right? Because like you should be proving value there. Don't just like shove people in a proposal. Be like, hey, do you want pricing? Right? Like we
Yep.
gotta make sure that we're actually elevating the value, et cetera. So that's fantastic. Well, Justin, I think that we could like talk all day long
I know.
because this is super fantastic. I really appreciate it. I can, man, you and Curl together is just like a ridiculous dynamic duo. I can only imagine how and the rest of the
I
sales
think
ops staff
I
over
think
there at Checkr who are all amazing.
he just brainwashed me, I think, to do his biddings, his data biddings.
I don't know. You guys have like an amazing team over there, like you and Curl, and then Kelly Arbuckle, just like a
Yeah.
really fantastic posse.
We're having a
So
blast.
yeah,
It's a lot of fun.
yeah, the sales team is like super lucky to have you guys, and then also I think the community is really lucky to have you guys share your insights and kind of advance the state of the art for the entire industry. So thank you for that. Just in terms of wrap up here. This is going to be recorded. If you're interested in starting your own kind of like journey towards awesome data-driven sales management, we'd love to help you out at Atrium. If you want to, you can just sign up at Atrium. It takes 5 minutes to set up a free account over there. Just go to Atrium HQ.com and you just connect your Salesforce instance there. Also, if you're not a member of Modern Sales, you should join up because then you can listen to smart people like Justin dropping knowledge on a recurring basis. So Justin, thank you very much for the time. Really appreciate it, and you have a great rest of your week. Okay.
Thanks, Pete. Appreciate you having me. Bye, everyone.
Okay.